Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to our fourth week of the webinar series, A Carbon Neutral Society Action Month, hosted by Kyushu University and in cooperation with APRU. So I'm Natalie Konomi. I'm a professor and a manager at the Global Strategies Office at Kyushu University, and I will be your MC today here again. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available temporarily on the APRU website. Also, as you may already be aware, this event is a regular Zoom meeting, so which is less anonymous than maybe the webinars themselves. Therefore, if your surroundings permit, especially during the discussion time, please turn on your cameras throughout the event, but keep your microphones off. And again, this week, I'm very happy actually to see when I look at my screen, many familiar names and not yet faces, but maybe faces later on. And so from our previous sessions, thank you very much for joining again. And I'm also happy to notice indeed some new names. Thank you also to our new participants. So let me quickly introduce a little bit about this webinar series. As we all know, climate change affects society, industries, everything, everywhere, everyone. And it's really important to work toward a carbon neutral society, we think, and implement solutions that support sustainability and economic growth. Now, boosting resource efficiency, lowering environmental impact, increasing disaster resilience, and decarbonizing society are just some of today's issues. And to solve these issues successfully, and if possible without compromising people's well-being, we need the experience and the passion of well-established scholars and younger researchers from a variety of disciplines. And as I always say, this is exactly all of you. That's what we all hope from you. And this Carbon Neutral Society webinar series highlights not only APRU universities, but mostly APRU universities' research endeavors to maintain the global environment and develop a sustainable society. So we hope this all will foster idea exchange, help for cross-disciplinary discussions, and create collaborative solutions maybe. So really building a worldwide network towards a carbon neutral future is crucial. And that's what we try to do with this little webinar. The webinar series is a pilot for a longer term program dedicated to the global environment preservation and a sustainable decarbonized society. We want to know how early career researchers and others with diverse degrees of environmental knowledge can actually collaborate and share knowledge to fight climate change. So be it engineers, scientists, economists, social scientists, politicians, I don't know, communities, community members, educators, like anyone really. Okay, enough of that summary. I would now like to outline the schedule for today. We will be focusing on circular economy. And we're very, very happy to have three top speakers again, who will each give a keynote speech of 20 minutes on their research field, followed by a short Q&A session after all three presentations, which then will lead us into our panel discussion. And we might have a 2-minute break somewhere in between before we start with our networking activity later on. Okay, let me introduce today's presenters in order of appearance quickly, so they can wave into the cameras. I'm honored to welcome Professor Scott Valentine from Kyushu University, and Professor Usha Ayuraniga from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, RMIT University, and then also Professor Masaru Yarime from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Now, I would also like to invite everyone to ask questions during the Q&A session and actively join the panel discussions afterwards, because we're really eager to hear from you. As a reminder, if you have questions, please write them in the chat box anytime during the presentation so that you don't forget them and that we can address them during the Q&A session. So I would now like to go to the official part and invite our first keynote speaker today, Dr. Scott Valentine. So Professor Valentine is an international reputed author, professor of regenerative planning and circular economy at the Institute of Asian and Oceanian Studies at Kyushu University in Japan, and senior circular economy advisor of KPMG Australia. He represents Standards Australia on international development of an ISO standard for the circular economy and is the chair of the Australian Circular Economies Hub's Advisory Committee. With over 30 years of diverse international business experience, Professor Valentine provides strategic project advice related to circular economy work within the firm and provides expert support for projects around the circular economy. He has led major research projects in Denmark and in the Netherlands around the circular economy with an emphasis on corporate strategy and public policy design and implementation. He's also an advisor to the Hume City Economic Development Team and has provided advice and training and guidance to government officials in over 20 nations around the world. So today, he will be talking about the coming era of the circular economy. What is it and what does it mean for Japan? So Scott, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks. Thanks to Prof. Konomi for hosting the event. When you're doing the 1, 2, 3, for some reason, you got me thinking about my visit to the dentist. You know, rinse, okay, and rinse, okay, and rinse. Great, loved it. Before I begin, I'd also like to extend a thanks to my two cherished colleagues, Prof. Yaraniga from Australia, Prof. Yarime, who's in Hong Kong, actually who's in the Netherlands right now. Really appreciate your time. My talk, folks, is going to be a very high level, quite a basic talk, just to understand what exactly the circular economy is all about. And then I'm going to give it over to my much more intelligent colleagues, Prof. Yarime and Prof. Yaraniga, and they're going to talk a little bit in depth about different aspects of the circular economy. Okay, so hey, why are we talking about the circular economy and carbon neutral, by the way? Did you know this? For every 1,000 N that's in your pocket right now, somewhere between 100 and 150 N is going to go for energy at some point in time. And you think to yourself, wait a minute, I don't own a car. My electricity bill is not so high. How is it possible that 15% of GDP actually goes to energy? And that's because we have this notion of, it's called embedded energy. Embedded energy is just the energy that goes into making things that we use. Wear a shirt, part of that shirt has embedded energy. My headphones, part of the headphone has embedded energy in it. If you add all of that up, the products that we use embed a significant amount of energy. Therefore, if we can improve the type of products that we use, if we can improve the life and the longevity of the products, we can actually reduce the amount of energy that we use and contribute to a carbon neutral society. So I thought I'd just put that into context because sometimes people don't understand the connections. Okay, agenda, very quickly. Why do we want to shift to CE? What is it? Give me some examples. And why is it important for Japan? That's what I'm going to talk about today. Before I do, just quick promotional slot for our organization, our institution. I'm with QAOS, which is the Asia Oceanic Institute for, help me, Asia Oceanic Studies Institute. Oh my goodness. We basically focus on SDG research. There is a significant number of researchers involved in this, and we all focus on doing on-site, on-demand research. So we like to get out into the world and actually do research on ways to help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, circular economy, business case. Check this out. Over the last 50 years, population has more than doubled. This is kind of old. GDP quadrupled, more than quadrupled. Per capita, we are getting more wealthy. What does this mean? It means that we have more stuff. And because we have more stuff, we are using more materials. And because we're using more materials, of course, our demand per capita is also going up. So I'm not going to get too far into economic theory, but the real basics of economics are simply this. when you've got a supply, S, and a demand, what happens is we achieve an equilibrium, meaning that consumers and producers are willing to either consume or produce at the same agreed level. And this is what establishes markets. So in my example here, this S is the original supply and D is the original demand. And so what happens is you get an aggregate price for a given basket of goods, and you get an aggregate number or an agreed number of quantities that will be produced by producers and purchased by consumers. And so what happens when we use a whole bunch of resources, I'll go right back here, when we have this type of profile, is that over time, the supply shifts. And when the supply shifts from S to S prime, what happens is you get a decline in the amount of material that people are willing to buy because the price is higher, right? Makes sense. The price is higher, you don't want to buy as much. Price is lower, you want to buy more. So that actually would normally be quite good for us because, if we have a high price, then, we're going to have less materials bought, therefore we will be more sustainable. But actually what's really happened is because people have become more affluent, we're also seeing a massive increase in demand from D to D prime. And so the combination of the two leads to this S prime, D prime meeting right up here. And look what's happened here. What we're seeing here is we're seeing actually globally, the consumption of materials are going up from normal, from Q to Q2, but also the prices are going up. So in other words, commodity prices are on the increase. Now, there's a whole bunch of examples that show that no, this isn't true. And the reason a lot of times these examples are not quite accurate is because there are a lot of hidden costs behind our usage. So I just wanted to show you this chart because I want to show you what happens when you've got a global extraction of materials, such as what we've seen here. Sorry, I'm going to put my pointer on here so people can see what I'm talking about. Okay. Okay, so while all this is going on, so prices are going up, while all of this is going on, we've got this problem with many of our resources. So this red line here indicates resources where we have an estimated less than 50 years of that given resource. And look at some of the terms here, or some of the resources: copper, gold, zinc, tin, antimony. So these are valuable resources that are used in our production processes, in our computers, in our phones. So if we start to run out of these and the prices increase, we are going to see massive increases in material costs. And that's of huge concern. So any country that is looking to develop an economic development strategy is looking to develop a strategy to somehow control the availability of resources so that the cost of making products is not high. Okay. So that's why we should be concerned about this, because the scarcity of resources is a real threat to both economic and ecological sustainability. In terms of the circular economy, well, what is it? Well, the economy part of the circular economy can be described by this. So essentially, the idea is that you want to achieve these types of activities first. If you're producing products, you want to reduce the amount of materials you're using. You want to reuse materials to the greatest extent possible, and you want to repair whatever you can repair. And you want to do all of this before you recycle. Why? Because the economic value of doing these things is higher than the economic value of recycling. Why is that? Well, for example, if I had a computer that was broken and I wanted to repair it, all it takes is a little bit of labor and some materials to fix. But if I want a brand new computer, I actually need to invest in something whereby the computer itself has been recreated. So, the breakdown of my current computer into plastics, metals, wires, etc. And then I need to have this sent off to another company to recycle the goods. Then it goes to another plant, and in that plant, you build a new computer. And because of all of this, you have all of these embedded costs. There's that term again, embedded costs. So energy, labor, transport, investment, rent, all of these things go into the recycling process in a big way. So if we want to have a more productive society, we need to aim for higher level elements. Okay, so that's the economy side. What's the circular side? Well, the circular side is a bunch of strategies to stop using these virgin resources so that we don't have these massive price increases due to scarcity, and to begin to somehow create cycles where we can get the materials back in play. But the cycles that we want to focus on are the eliminate and reduce tasks, reuse, and repair, because that's where the money is. And all of these loops just represent different strategies that companies and consumers can use in order to keep the resources in the economy. So that's what we're kind of trying to do with the circular economy. Okay, if we do this right, it's an economic optimization strategy. And what that means is that we have higher profits for businesses so they can employ more people. We have better economic resilience because we don't have to worry about imported resources. We have stronger communities because people talk with each other and work together and collaborate. That's what you need to do in a circular economy. Lower waste management costs, better ecological footprints, and relevant to our series on carbon neutral economies, lower carbon footprints. Why? Because we use more resources, we use fewer resources to do the same thing. As a result of that, the embedded energy, there's the word again, embedded energy is lower. Okay. I'm going to quickly skip through this slide, but I just included this slide for download later because this just suggests why companies should be interested in this. See, when I started working in sustainability, probably about 20 years ago now, companies were not really interested in pursuing sustainable business practice because it came at a cost. The great thing about the circular economy is that all of the elements of the circular economy contribute to sustainability enhancements, but at the same time also contribute to profitability. So for example, if you want to contribute to climate change, use energy more efficiently. If you can reduce, by half the energy you use, you can reduce by half the greenhouse gas emissions you produce. Same thing with cost inflation for companies. If you want to try to reduce the cost of the resources in your business, then you need to look at how you use your resources better. This is a circular economy strategy. These things all in the middle of circular economy strategies. If you want to innovate and try to beat out your customers by producing better, newer, more attractive products, then you need to design things in a design thinking manner and collaboratively. This is a design thinking strategy. And finally, sustainability. If you want to contribute to sustainability as a business, you need to look at your business as part of a bigger system. And so all of these things that are the basic tenets, the basic principles of the circular economy go into solving many of our world's problems while allowing companies to be profitable. Seems like a pretty good deal, doesn't it? That's certainly why I'm interested in it, because I know that when you talk about the circular economy, businesses will listen because there's profits and benefits open to them. Okay, very quickly, because we don't have any time, and some of you still might be confused as to what the circular economy is all about. So I'm just very quickly going to go through some examples. Using things like waste coffee to grow items. That's the circular economy. Using fishing nets to make carpeting. That's the circular economy. Building buildings that are, more ecologically friendly. That's the circular economy. Creating repair cafes so people can come and have things repaired without throwing them away. All of these things. Renting clothes rental services instead of buying. Using new materials such as PET bottle fibers or bamboo or other elements or viscose fibers in order to create clothing. That's the circular economy. Using things like construction waste in order to create acoustic panels. That's the circular economy. This is yarn that's made from PET bottle waste. That's the circular economy. So the circular economy is all about just rethinking how you do business. Are there ways that you can do things virtually that would normally have cost you more money? Remember how we used to rent videos before Netflix? I sure do. It used to be costly and time consuming to go to video stores. So all of these things are part of the new fad that we're calling the circular economy, but it raises all of these new business interests, providing lighting as a service rather than a good. Okay. So very quickly, because I know, Natalie, unless you've, I don't know if you've been prompting me yet or not, because I haven't seen my chat.
No,
Oh,
I talked too long at the beginning. So you still have you still have 5 minutes.
I've got 5 minutes. Well, let's have a coffee together, shall we? And just, all right. So why is all this important for Japan? And Prof. Yarime is going to present some statistics. In fact, he dug up a statistic that I've kind of poached from him because I couldn't find it. So why is it important? Well, let's look at Japan here. In terms of labor productivity, this is shocking. Japan is one of the most inefficient of the OECD nations. In fact, if you look at it, productivity, as in a dollar amount, and compare Japan to Ireland, Ireland is almost twice as productive when you look at it from a labor productivity standpoint. So labor is a resource, just like materials are. The circular economy deals with material and labor inefficiencies. So adopting better practices in how you approach labor is part of the circular economy. In Japan, we've got a long way to go. Now, in terms of materials management, Japan has actually done very well in many areas. If you look at the statistics here, you can see on the left, final disposal and landfill. Japan, with rapidly depleting landfills, has done a wonderful job in actually reducing the amount of waste that goes into landfills. But notice here, and you're going to see this with Professor Yarime's statistics as well from a different source. They have basically, over the past 10 years, began to sort of cap out here. So improvement is getting harder and harder to achieve. In terms of recycling rates, you can see what's been happening with Japan. Japan always has pretty good recycling rates, but nevertheless, it's sort of stagnated a bit over the years. In terms of industrial waste, recycling rates, you're actually getting a stagnation here. So although Japan has done very well in putting into place recycling systems, we're getting to a stage where recycling alone just is not going to be able to contribute to further resource productivity. Now, what are we talking about in terms of resource productivity? Well, resource productivity is, broadly thought of as, the amount of GDP that's produced, per unit or ton of resources that are employed. And so on the left here, I wanted to show you what the international picture is. So internationally, globally from, the mid 90s, remember I just showed you that statistic about Japan's labor productivity, right? Well, you see how everybody else has been improving, right? And you can see here in terms of materials, so materials is the blue, is that, sort of Japan is sort of capped out a little bit here, right? It's improved, but not as much. Now, in terms of energy productivity, sorry, this is globally, this isn't Japan, this is globally. Okay, so globally, I want to focus in on this blue here. So in terms of material productivity, the world actually hasn't improved much over the past, say, 20 years, right? You can see this dip here. This is the light blue at the bottom. Whereas in Japan, and you'll see this from Prof. Yarime's statistics, Japan has actually improved significantly over that time. I question this. I'm not convinced always that data in Japan is as accurate as we would like it to believe. We often see a number of scandals associated with reporting, and there's a lot of pressure to report well. Data, it's always can be manipulated. I'm going to present some that favor me. Others will present some that favor their narrative. So there's some questions here. But what's causing Japan's productivity growth? Is it better technology? Is it the fact that now, you've got Toyotas and Nissans that are produced in China rather than in Japan? So the, industrial elements of Japan's business sectors are being moved overseas? Is it because that we're shifting more and more to a service economy? Is it because of cheaper resource imports? All of these things could have, an explanation. The point is that when you look at it, Japan has done well for labor productivity, but I'm not convinced that we're actually doing as well as we should be. Why do I say that? Well, here's some food for thought. This is in behind our office building. And I stood out on Monday and saw a truck pull up to this place and see all these lovely monitors. There's some printers, and I saw 3 young guys take much of this equipment and throw it, not place it, throw it into this area to be smashed up and taken away. I can guarantee you that much of this is still actually repairable and usable, but of course we're not going to do that. We're going to wind up sending it for recycling and pat ourselves on the back and say, haven't we done a great job? Well, the reality is that we have done a good job in recycling. Look on the right here. Japan has a recycling program that leads the world when it comes to things like, appliances, home appliances. Look at these levels of achievement, over 90%. But you know what that's done? It's completely gutted the repair industry. So look at the trends for appliance repairs. This is where the productivities are, in repairing things, not in just simply breaking things down and adding more labor costs and energy. So we've got some issues that we need to achieve. And if we can do that, we can give the Japanese economy a boost, I believe. And why is that necessary? Well, look what's happened with Japan. I mean, Japan has still done well in terms of gross GDP trends, but it hasn't done so well that it's now, replicating what we saw in the 1970s and 1980s. It's actually starting to fall behind many of the OECD nations. Now, this isn't, per se, awful, but it also does not leave Japan in a very comfortable position when we are faced with so many fiscal deficits. We need to be improving in these areas. So why is the circular economy important for Japan? It's because Japan has been very successful to this date in recycling. It's done a really good job in dealing with its resources because it's a resource poor nation, but it is not extracting the most value that it can from resources. And I believe that the circular economy can certainly achieve that. Okay, I'm going to end there. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for this very introductory, but also very inspiring talk. So I think everybody has a good first impression now about what is circular economy. And I would now like to invite our second speaker for today, Professor Usha Ayuraniga, Professor of Sustainable Built Environment at RMIT University and co-lead of the UN One Planet Network Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program. Usha has 30 years experience across academia and research, industry and government. She has extensive experience in providing grounded solutions for sustainability using applied research as the means. Her current role with the UN One Planet Network is on delivering the UN 2030 agenda arising from SDG 12. Her work focuses on accelerating sustainability in the built environment through networked policy and programs. And sorry. Usha is also review and scientific committee member for national and international referred journals and refereed conferences. She is on the editorial board for refereed journals, and she has worked on special issues. Now, Usha has served and is currently serving on the boards of various not-for-profit organizations and has also served as panel judge for a number of local and international awards, such as the Premier Sustainability Award in Victoria and the International Green Gown Awards. So Usha will be talking about circular considerations in urban environments, a case study from Australia. Please, Usha, and I would like to remind the audience to turn off your microphones during the webinar meeting. Thank you. Usha, please, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, and hopefully you should see my screen now. Please yell out if you don't. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to start off, as Natalie said, it was a great context that you provided, Scott. It makes my job a lot easier, so I don't have to get into the concepts, and I can actually talk about the application of some of these concepts. I'll talk about the work that I'm doing with the UN One Planet Network at a global level, and some of the things that we have done in relation to circular built environment there. And I'll also talk specifically about some research that we've undertaken here in Australia, which is really just a milestone has been completed for one of our research projects. So I'm really happy to be sharing the preliminary results of that research with you. So just to give you a sense of, and this is again lifting off from the work that Scott has already done and made easier for me today, is just if you take a step back and really start thinking about the role of the built environment and the role of the impact that the built environment has, we consume, if you particularly consider the extraction of virgin raw materials, we consume about 40% of global raw materials. And this is of particular importance when you're talking about the rapid city building and rapid construction that is taking place in the, what I call the new growth regions of the world. So Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We also know that once buildings are built or once infrastructure is built, it needs to be maintained. So there are some operational impacts as a result of having these buildings and infrastructure in place. But we also know that, and particularly in the building context, we know that buildings, once they build, use energy. So they use heating, they use lighting, they use ventilation, etc. And people use these buildings. So there's a lot of waste that is created in the process of using these buildings, and likewise it's the case with the use of water as well. But we also know that in most economies, and certainly in the Australian context, when the building industry is performing well, the economy as a whole is performing well. And so there's a direct correlation between how economies are performing and how the building and construction industry is faring within countries. And so there's a lot of workforce that's associated with buildings and construction. So just don't think about engineers that may be involved in the design or construction, but also think about, particularly in the residential and the commercial sectors, think about real estate agents and property people and so on. So this industry has got a very big footprint. But alarming statistic, if we continue to build the way we are building currently, then by 2060, a lot of materials, and this is already beginning to happen now in countries like Sri Lanka and India and Indonesia, already habitats are being affected by the excavation of sand for using in buildings and construction. So already there's been an impact on biodiversity. And so if we continue to use materials the way we have continued to do till today, we're going to be in a lot of problems in terms of having these materials available for the future. So what does circular economy mean? I won't go through the definition of circular economy because I think Scott has explained that really well. But what I wanted to highlight is what are the advantages of circular economy? So if buildings and construction and our built environment adopted a circular pathway, then we will be able to reduce the amount of resources that we currently use. And as a result of that, the environmental impact that's associated with the manufacture, the transportation, the production of these materials. And if we start thinking more from a local or a localized perspective, then we're actually supporting local jobs and local economies. And this is really important because it touches on things like SDG 8 and economic growth and so on. Now, what has the One Planet Network been working on? So over the last 7 years, we have focused a lot of our work, especially over the last 4 years, on circular built environments and the use of responsibly sourced materials. And we work very closely with the governments of a number of countries because we believe that one way to look at how we bring the world back onto a more reasonable trajectory and less environmental impact in building materials is to work directly with governments because they also determine what the national determined contributions are under the Paris Agreement. We have developed a number of tools, and I'm happy to talk about them later on if you've got time. We have developed a number of case studies and regional reports, and I should say that a lot of these case studies have looked at not just examples of what's going on in best example is circular economy in Europe, but also looked at what are some of the things that can be done at a local level or a country level in some of the countries that we're talking about in the global south. And then, of course, we have formed a network of organizations where we're always sharing information across different countries. We have done some work around the state of play of circular built environments, and we have done an international survey where we have looked at how the Sustainable Development Goals might actually be used as indicators for circular built environment. And I should also mention that the Sustainable Development Goals don't actually focus specifically on circularity at all, but yet the principles underpinning the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly around resource efficiency, is important and needs to be taken into consideration. So just very quickly, there are 10 recommendations that came out of our global report that was presented a couple of years ago, and the work on developing those indicators continues and will continue to the end of this year. And I'm not going to go through all 10 of them now, but I just want you to think about the first one, which is think and act differently. So we are taught, we are educated, and we live in a largely linear world. We live in a world where we produce things, we extract things, we use them, and then we throw them away. But the whole idea of circular is how do we use materials, products in its second life? So does it need to be recycled? Could it be remanufactured? Could it be repurposed? Could it be repaired? And for the context of buildings and construction, this is particularly important because we often talk about demolition of buildings when we don't want a particular type of building, or when we find that buildings are not going to fulfill the functions for which it has been designed for. We often talk about how those buildings could be demolished, and we end up wasting a lot of materials that eventually ends up in landfill. Whereas what circular economy is about is, can we talk about deconstruction of buildings so that we can reuse these materials as much as possible into other construction projects, and we can retain the value of these materials. So a beam is used as a beam, a window frame is used as a window frame, and so on and so forth. So let me now do a little bit of a deep dive to talk about this research. So there are three main areas that I'm involved in through the circular activities at RMIT. The first of this is through the Circular Economy Hub at RMIT, which is in the last column. And I should say that Scott started the beginnings of the Circular Economy Network when he was at RMIT. It's a bunch of interdisciplinary researchers who are interested in understanding what is going on across our waste management streams, across the supply chains, and ultimately taking that sectoral and interdisciplinary approach that's needed for circular economy. And then we have these two research projects, the Victorian Circular Activator, whose role is to engage and activate with industry, develop and professional development programs and other types of programs, so that we're constantly keeping the industry abreast of circular economy knowledge, experience, and sharing that knowledge. And then is the integrated circular economy, climate change, and clean energy platform, which is another funded project. And here we're looking at not just how circular economy interacts with people and with society, but we're also interested in bringing in concepts of clean energy and climate resilience into the mix. So it's a good way to approach this trifecta. I'm going to skip the slide and just go straight into the research objectives. So as part of this research, what did we want to do? We wanted to identify who were the key actors and what is their role in the Victorian ecosystem. So Victoria is one of a number of different states in Australia in the southern part of the country. It's quite well known for its coffee culture, but also as a sporting capital. And because this funding came from Victorian government, the focus of this study was largely in Victoria, but we're trying to now extrapolate what it means for other states in Australia as well. So we also wanted to understand what were the enablers and barriers to transition to a well-developed circular economy system, because the state has had a circular economy roadmap, and it's got a policy platform, and so wanted to take a very clear what's the word I'm looking for? Very stepped approach to circular economy. And we also wanted to understand, once we identify these actors, how do we present this? So that visual representation is pretty important part of the project. And then what are the recommendations that are arising out of it? So a number of different research methods we use. We use desktop research. We use stakeholder interviews. We also undertook some industry surveys that largely represented small to medium enterprise involved in the response to the research. And then we developed an ecosystem map. And then the next step from this is to validate this work through focus group discussions. So in terms of the policy review, what did we find? We find that there was a clear hierarchical alignment of targets between the various levels of government policy. So this is looking at a federal level, the state level, but also at the local government level. But what we also found is that they're not necessarily always aligned. So the focus of a lot of these policies is really on the end of pipeline. So looking really at waste management policies and not really thinking about the role or how things could go back into the supply chain, and thinking about the broader opportunities that arises. So if you're only thinking about materials and end of pipeline, and the image that Scott presented of all the stuff that is just sitting somewhere in the back end, and somebody just picks it up and throws it away, rather than thinking about, well, let's see if we can repair some of these things, or let's see if some of these things could be reused, or if it could be supplied back to the manufacturer. So the value add at the end of pipeline is very much missing in the narrative and in the discourse. And then we also found that, while the Environment Protection Act and the legislation talks about targets, these targets are all focused on solid waste. There's really not much opportunity in the liquid, so nothing in the sewage, nothing in terms of the water sector. So it's very much focused only on waste management, and largely municipal waste management. And then when we look at what came out of the interviews, and then when we compared what the people told us from the interviews with what is in the theoretical or the academic definitions in the literature, we found that when we took look at it from a systemic perspective, there was discussions on waste and industrial system, but nobody's really talking about the full economic system. So we're not talking about things like informal economy and the employment that's associated with informal economy. We're still talking about GDP. When you look at the different principles, 0 to 10, that Potting et al. Have identified from refuse right through to recover, as in waste to energy options, we found that there was a lot of discussion around recycling and recovering, but there was really not much in repurposing, remanufacturing, and regeneration. So that is really a missing piece in the findings of the research. And then we found that when we were talking about processes, the process of production and consumption came up in the interview findings and in the discussions, but not much about extraction. So people are not really thinking about upstream, the impact of upstream and where these materials come up. They're sort of thinking about what they need for their businesses or what they need for their everyday use, but not thinking about where these materials have come up or come from, and where are these materials ending at at the end of the use. And then it was pretty clear that, while a lot of our interview participants talked a lot about the economic, environmental, and social, sort of the triple bottom line of sustainability, they were not really thinking about more about the social or the economic side. And this is very, very much linked with the work on the principles. So this is using Potting's hierarchy of the 10 R principles, from refuse right through to recover. So we found that really a lot of the discussions was in the R2, R3, reduce, reuse, or in the recycle, recover. And there's really nothing around actually refusing or rethinking and looking at how do we bring these loops back onto smarter product manufacture and reuse, or extending the lifespan of products. So at a macro level, we found that really there isn't a systemic transition to circular economy. And this is really, really important as a policy direction, because if there is no alignment across all the different levels of government and in the regulatory frameworks, then of course there isn't going to be a systemic transition to circular economy. We also found that, because of the China sold policy and China stopped taking Australian waste, a lot of the discussions is really about how do we manage our waste at the end of the pipeline. So it's very difficult. We're almost locking in that sort of thinking rather than thinking about the circular economy as an economy and as a system. We also found that, what people understood as circular economy is really, it is a business approach of a resource efficiency concept. And so the social side of circular economy is completely undervalued. And not surprisingly, we also found that there's no commonly accepted metric available to measure circularity. So when you talk about circular economy or circular principles, people don't really understand, or between conversations between stakeholders is going in different directions, because there's no common definition of what circular economy actually means. At a micro level, we found that businesses were really talking about recycling or recovery models as circular business models. So they weren't thinking about the wider impact. And again, we found that, it was a very technical response to circular economy. So it's not really bringing in economic people, the environmental people, the social people, the socio-technical behavior change people, but really it was championed by engineers. And a lot of startups are talking about circular economy, again, as technical solution. And so there's a lot of work currently in Australia that is around the use of recyclate in the infrastructure sector. So, reuse of building materials, aggregates, or plastics even into roadways and things like that. But again, there isn't thinking of, if we do well in the plastic sector, for instance, there will be a time where plastics are not going to be available. So what are we going to do in relation to that? And we also found that, businesses are interested in circular economy. They're interested in it from a ethical or a moral perspective, but they so the feeling or the intent associated with circular economy is, doing the right thing. But how does this then be transported or translated across businesses? So our recommendations were that we need to start looking at developing an alignment of regulations that looks at the full circular economy ecosystem. We need to understand and bring in more economics around the circular economy as an economic system. We need to develop indicators, and sustainability. Victoria has started looking at some of these impact metrics, but it's very much at an initial stage. And that we need to bring in more financial support, because businesses stated very clearly that they're not interested in pivoting to a circular economy or pivoting to circular solutions if there isn't any financial imperative or financial outlay to be gained by this process. At a MESA level, we were looking at developing sector-specific standards and guidelines. So looking at infrastructure sector or the textiles industry and plastics industry and so on, and looking at where pilots might be supported or created. So then they become a good example of not just as a case study for the sake of it, but as a good business case for shifting the rest of the economy also in that direction. And at a micro level, more education, more understanding on improving the ethical and moral approach to circular economy. And I'll just leave you with this one. Where are we heading to in the future? We are in the process now of validating some of our work by going back to our stakeholders and asking them whether these findings actually resonate with them or not. We are in the midst of developing an ecosystem platform so people can actually engage with each other online around various issues around circular economy. And then we're also looking at development of business case models. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Usha, for this very stimulating talk. And sorry again for all this time pressure always. So to our audience now, as a reminder, I see already you're putting questions in the chat box. Wonderful. Please continue to do so for the Q&A session later on. And I would now like to welcome our next and final keynote speaker for today, Professor Masaru Yarime. He's an associate professor at the Division of Public Policy in the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. But right now he's in the Netherlands at 4 a.m. and joining us. So thank you very much for this. Professor Yarime also has appointments as honorary reader at the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy in the University College London, visiting associate professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy in the University of Tokyo, and visiting scholar at the Japan International Cooperation Agency JICA Research Institute. His research interests center around science, technology, and innovation policy for energy, environment, and sustainability. For the past years, he has been engaged in research and educational activities from interdisciplinary perspectives with an intention to understand the complex interface between engineering and social sciences and the dynamic interactions between technology and institutions in creating sustainability innovation. He's particularly interested in exploring the structure, functions, and evolution of innovation systems involving stakeholders in various sectors with a focus on smart cities. Due to time constraints, I will not list all his cooperation and collaboration experiences with academia, industry, government, and civil society in Asia, Europe, and North America. But our event program on the APRU website also contains additional information on all our speakers. So please take a look at this. So Professor Yarime will be talking about towards a carbon neutral circular economy, stakeholder collaboration for data-driven innovation. So Professor Yarime, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Economy, for your kind introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about the opportunities and challenges in facilitating data-driven innovation for a carbon neutral circular economy, which is the theme of the whole event. Well, I think Professor Valentine mentioned in his presentation that, well, I think in a way, Japan has introduced some policies and regulations to promote what is called circular society or 循環型社会. in the late 90s and also early 2000s. So I think they have introduced relatively well-established policies and also practices, particularly emphasizing the conventional approach to waste management, which include what is called the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. So in a way that technically speaking, I think Japan has achieved a certain degree of success in reducing the environmental impacts and also increasing resource productivity. This is kind of some of the data taken from the annual report on the environment published by the Ministry of Environment. And as you can see, since the late 90s to the current the period, and then you can see resource productivity has been increasing, and also the landfill area has been landfill amount would be declining. Although the cyclical use ratio with regard to input side and also the output side, in the recent years that the progress has been somehow stagnating, which is I think what is also mentioned by Professor Valentine earlier. So I think the challenge is how we can move from 3R conventional approach to the circular economy, which is the topic of our discussion at this moment. So in that sense, I think it'd be quite useful to think about what is called product service systems. In a way, I think this has been proposed by I think the industry and also business people who are working on manufacturing and then how to create values by providing services rather than just selling the product. So there have been a lot of discussion in this area with regard to how we could design and implement the product service systems. And we can see some of the examples like the shifting from product sales to use, sharing platforms and leasing. And also we can think about the use-oriented approach, which include extending product lifetime through repair, upgrading, reuse, and remanufacturing. And also we can think about the substituting goods with services in general. So potentially we could think about these the strategies for realizing a transition from a linear economy to a circular economy. So we can think about all the various kinds of strategies for the circular economy, like servitization, subscription, sharing, renting, leasing, repair, reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishing. All these the opportunities are available. So the challenge is how we can utilize these strategies for achieving a circular economy and also at the same time carbon neutrality. So there are a lot of the debates about to what extent that circular economy strategies can also achieve the carbon neutrality. And as you can imagine, that they may not necessarily be consistent with each other, in a sense that we need to be very careful that the circular economy strategies are actually contributing to achieving carbon neutrality. So which means that we also need to think about the potential trade-offs or a kind of dilemma in picking up which one would be the objective we should emphasize. So here, this is actually a study made by Professor Murakami and his colleagues. I'm actually working with Professor Murakami at the University of Tokyo. I just want to introduce some of his recent findings. And here we can see some of the products and product service category like appliances, ICT, clothes and books and automobiles and others. So how we can somehow apply different kinds of circular economy strategies and then to see what will be the impacts on global warming potentials. And as you can see here, there are large variations with regard to the impacts of the circular economy strategies on global warming potentials. And particularly, we need to pay attention to some of the negative impacts on the global warming potential by taking some circular economy strategies. For example, here usually reuse would be really having the certain positive impacts on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but in other cases, sharing, for example, might be having a negative impact on reducing CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And there are some potential reasons, and one would be transportation or transport, which means that by encouraging sharing with many users, and then that we really need to transfer or transport these the goods or the products among many people. So that transportation could contribute to increasing the GHG emissions. So we need to be very carefully looking at for which products, which strategy will be really contributing to achieving circular economy and also the carbon neutrality. So this is really a technical issue. So I do not go deeper into this topic, but that's the thing that probably the researchers can explore with all the data increasingly available through the supply chain. So one key the area which we can discuss with regard to achieving circular economy and also the carbon neutrality is the batteries. And this is also picked up by the European Union, particularly that they are now proposing a new legislation on batteries so that all the sustainability dimensions, including the carbon footprints and also labor issues and also the welfare issues throughout the supply chain. So we really need to make sure that the batteries are produced and used sustainably through the whole the value chain. So that has become really a big topic, particularly given what is called the Brussels effect, which means that the European Union has already a strong influence on regulations and policies, not only within Europe, but also outside Europe by providing the market so that all the companies exporting their products and services need to somehow comply with the European Union's regulations and policies. So this has become a really big topic for manufacturers of batteries across the world. So this is also an illustration about how the lithium-ion batteries can be repurposed or recycled or reused. So particularly this figure shows some of the existing studies about how the circular economy strategies can be considered for lithium-ion batteries, and then particularly repurposing, which means that using used batteries from EVs can be used for other purposes like residential applications or some other the applications like grid-based systems. So now that is really a big challenge and also opportunity how we can facilitate the repurposing or cascading reuse of used batteries. And then that many companies and also industries are now moving into that direction. So how we can actually create a market for repurposing or reusing used batteries coming from EVs. And this is such a big topic because now many countries are now emphasizing a shift from gasoline-based vehicles to EVs. And then that particularly, for example, in China, that in the coming years, we see explosion of the used EVs and used batteries coming out to the market. So how to deal with these a huge amount of used batteries will be a big challenge globally. So one issue would be how we can set a price for used batteries so that we can really facilitate the transactions of used batteries. So that is something that, now the companies and industries working on. And as you know, that used EVs have been struggling to, well, in a way that compared with the conventional vehicles, that it's not very easy to price a second-hand EV, in the sense that it's really difficult to evaluate the quality of used batteries coming out of EVs. So which means that it's really difficult to maintain a robust second-hand market for EVs. So which means that we really need to have a detailed data about the quality of batteries so that we can evaluate accurately the state of the batteries, so that we can reflect the conditions to a pricing mechanism, so that we can really create a robust and reliable market. So which means that we really need to provide data and share data and then exchange the data. And then we also need to increase the transparency of that data so that we can rely on the transactions involving many stakeholders. So that is something that I'm now actually working on with some companies and also Professor Murakami, and so that how we can set up a system or platform for the facilitating the use of used batteries, which is called the BASE platform, the Battery Circular Economy platform. So this is something that we really need to promote, and then on that the blockchain is used to guarantee that the data is somehow is authentic and not manipulated. So in that sense, that we can also think about using the batteries for residential purposes, and then think about the peer-to-peer energy exchange among the households, so that we can use all these batteries coming out of EVs, and then also we can facilitate the exchange of energy between households, so that we can have a more resilient and flexible microgrid energy systems. So that is also something I'm working on with my colleagues. And then there are a lot of opportunities and challenges in distributed energy systems for incorporating the more renewable energy sources. But then the one key challenge is actually the data, how to govern the data. So data availability, accessibility, interoperability, and also obviously cybersecurity issues, and also privacy and trust. This is also something that the European Union has been emphasizing by introducing the GDPR, and also increasingly many countries talk about data sovereignty, so that the data transfer going beyond national boundaries will also be a challenging issue at this stage. So in the end, that we really need to think about individual rights like privacy, and also the interest of data holders like platform providers. And also we really need to think about the public interest, climate change and circular economy. So how we can make a balance among the three key aspects in facilitating the transition to circular economy and carbon neutrality. So yeah, this is really the last slide. I'd like to mention some of the key challenges in establishing data governance for innovation for sustainability. And then that there are different approaches to data governance, and probably that should be depending upon the local context and the conditions, and also to the extent that data can be accessible for public purposes, particularly data held by private sectors. So that to be also a very the serious challenge in the coming years. And also data sovereignty, especially we are talking about the circular economy. So we also need to think about international, the system for reusing and repurposing the batteries, for example. So then that in that case, we also need to share the data. So which means that we need to facilitate data transfer going beyond national borders. And they also need to think about standardization internationally so that we can use the same standards so that we can facilitate or the transfer of data. So, and then in the end that we really need to think about the participation of all the stakeholders, and we also need to address the inclusiveness. And then we also need to, in the end, think about the trusting institutions involved in data governance, in the sense that we really need to deal with the sensitive data. So which means that we really need to have a strong trusting institutions which are somehow governing all the data. So in the end, that we really need to think about this digital transformation involving a lot of data, and then sustainable transformation, so that how we can manage difficult transformation involving data and also technologies. So this is the end of my talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yarime, for this very insightful speech and presentation, actually. I think it's a great time now to open the Q&A session / panel discussion. It's kind of a mixed, I would say. And I did already notice that we had some questions in the chat, which already have been replied to, but I would still, I would like still to look at the questions in the chat because not everybody looked at it. As a reminder, please post your questions in the chat, or you could just raise your hands, the hand raise function button here in Zoom, and ask your questions directly. And also when I address the questions in the chat, I might ask actually the person who asked the question to speak. And again, as a reminder, please feel free to show your faces now. It's always nicer to look at the people rather than just look at the black screens, most of it. So yeah, let me just take a look at some of the questions that came in already. And we did have a question right at the beginning by, one second, by Dao Janjaran. Sorry, I'm totally mispronouncing your names, from Chulalongkorn University, asking what is the difference between remanufacture and recycle? And Scott already gave a reply here, but maybe you could just share your response here too, because maybe others have the same question.
Oh, okay. Actually, Usha had on her slide, I don't know if Usha, you can pull it up really quickly, but she had a slide where she where they've defined the difference between manufacturing and repair. That's a little bit more elaborate, but in the box, I just give, as Usha I think is going to try and share this. I gave an example of the Renault manufacturing plant in Paris. So Renault actually has a plant where they take, you know, their used cars, and they take all of the parts out, and then they use the parts for the creation of new automobiles. So it's a really good example of remanufacturing. So taking, rather than repair where you're using the same good, you just fix the good and use it. What you're doing with remanufacturing is you're taking the parts out to compile them into a new good.
Yep, I've just brought this up, so let me share my screen so you can see it.
So great questions, by the way. So please keep them coming.
Hopefully you can see. So yeah, so
Yes.
this has been my Bible when I look at circular economy. It really helps in understanding what each of these different things mean, and it would be great to have each of these in the different sectors that we're looking at. So what does it mean in the textile sector? What would this mean in buildings and construction? What would this mean in you know, for batteries and so on?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, then we have a question by Raphael. He actually asked 2 questions. One was, I think, quite interesting, provoking. So maybe Raphael, you would like to repeat the question here so that not everybody's finding it maybe in the chat necessarily. So would you be interested?
Yeah, good
Great.
night, thank you. My question was regarding the definition of resources and proved reserves, because, for example, in the case of oil or any mineral, it's not necessarily true that we are facing scarcity of resources. In some cases, we are facing a problem to add resources to prove reserves. That was one of my questions. Trying to understand this part of circular economy and this relation with resources and reserves.
Wonderful. Scott, I saw that you replied, but yeah, maybe you want to add something here. And
No, maybe Prof. Yarime or Prof. Yaraniga, because I've answered in the box. So.
Right.
But thanks, Raphael, for the question. Great question.
So maybe Masaru, would you like to answer or give a reply here? A comment as well? Sorry, can you hear us? Are we good?
Yes. So I'm just trying to understand the original question.
So I can maybe repeat it once again.
Yeah.
As it's listed here. So first question that Raphael had was, or comment was that although mineral resources are finite, for some scarcity is not an immediate problem. The problem is that resources have not been added to proven reserves. In the context of the urgency to mitigate climate change, to what extent will governments and companies continue to invest to add resources to reserves? That was one question he had.
Yes. Sorry.
So it's at 10:38 a.m. if you in the chat box. Oh well, 10:30 a.m. my time. So that would be probably 3:38.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think investment in resources is obviously a big challenge, and also with regard to climate change issue, for example, yeah, I think in the past years, now we have seen a lot of pressure on companies to shift away from fossil fuels, for example, and then apparently the investment in fossil fuels has somewhat declined, and then particularly concerning all the risks involved in making investment in resources, which could become a kind of stranded asset in the end. So that has been a kind of recent issue, but then that now we see the price increase in oil and gas, and then also some geopolitical issue now happening. So it's very difficult challenge in the sense that we don't know what will happen in the future. So although we have a kind of long-term objective of achieving the carbon neutrality in the end, but at the same time, we also need to think about how to manage a transition to a carbon neutral economy or circular economy. So it's very difficult, the challenge at this moment, that how we can manage this difficult period. For example, in Europe, now just yesterday, I think Europe decided to cut the import of oil from Russia, for example. That could really give a constraint on the supply side. so how to meet the demands for the energy, for example. So that might require some kind of investment in, as a kind of transition investment in the fossil fuels facilities, for example. So we really need to have a very difficult and delicate analysis of the short-term demands and requirements, and also long-term objective of achieving climate change and carbon neutrality in the end. So yeah, to be honest, I really do not have a clear answer to your question, but we really need to think about all these factors now in this current uncertain era.
Can I just make a quick comment, and if that's okay, Natalie?
Yes, please.
I think that we really need to start thinking about long-term impacts. So a good example is heading towards a renewable energy pathway, but we find that, say with solar panels, and the number of solar panels that has been, is on rooftops in Australia has rapidly increased, supported by, government incentives and other such types of schemes. But then we've got a problem with our first and second generation of panels because we don't know what to do with them. The amount of waste that is produced just within the PV industry, the photovoltaic industry alone, is horrendous. So where I'm sort of drawing the attention, the point that I'm making is we've got opportunities to move down the renewable pathway, but we're still relying on the use of cobalt and iron and a number of rare earths that go into the production of batteries, but also go into the production of the panels themselves. And so we are at this point where we really need to take a good hard look at, yes, technology will help, but is it just technology alone? Can we try and bring in some of the other circular economy type of principles like Second Life, or product to service models, or taking it back to manufacturers so it could be reused back into their supply chain or into somebody else's supply chain. So I think at the moment we're still thinking in the renewable energy industry. I think is a very good example of still being entrenched in very linear practices. So I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm really happy we're getting a lot of questions and comments here. So I'm gonna go back to one question or comment that we had by Zijin Xie, maybe from Keio University, actually, asking about the situation in Japan, or commenting on the situation in Japan where consumers bear most of the cost of waste disposal. So maybe, Zijin, if you're here, maybe you could repeat, ask your question into the audience, and then you can get.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So my question here is actually really like specific in Japan, maybe. So we know that in Japan, the customers bearing most of the cost of throwing your waste, especially when your waste is oversized garbage and electronic waste. So we have to pay a lot of money to throw our furnitures, for example. So, but on the other hand, those companies, those manufacturing companies, they didn't bear any of these costs of disposal of this waste. So my question here is that, is there any way to let these companies to take responsibilities and to make them to produce their products, to make their products more eco-friendly and more easier for the customers to recycle it? Yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
Wonderful, great question. And I think it's not only Japan, maybe even. So yeah, so maybe Scott is already looking to the camera, excited to answer. So I'm going to hand over to Scott here once.
Not as much excited to answer, but excited by the question. It's a very good question. And I did answer, but if I can, I'd like to share my screen again and just tell me if you can see something that says a circular business. This is just from some of my my work at KPMG. And I'll just go down to the bottom here. There's just foolish things that are happening in industry. This is a great example, and I put this in the chat. Here's a picture of a cordless Ryobi drill. Okay, so the battery pack has fallen apart. It doesn't work, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to go online and try to find a new battery pack. I went online. This drill cost me Sanzen Gohyakuen, 3,500 yen. Okay, so about $40, I guess, US. So I go online to buy a replacement part, and the replacement part is US $45. The replacement part is more than I paid for the entire drill. So you have to ask yourself, where is the profits happening here? If Ryobi is making it so difficult to, this is what we call planned obsolescence. This company, it just seems to me they're not interested in actually me continuing to use this. They want me to throw away this drill and buy a new Ryobi drill, right? So I go online just to look for the batteries. I start to take it apart and I go online to look for these batteries. And when I go online, I find that the same battery, this NiCad battery, is almost $10 each. There's 5 batteries, $50. So here's another company that is just gouging customers to try to replace this. So finally, I just gave up. I said, oh, forget it then. I'm just going to, so I bought this drill for $15. A better drill, with better voltage, and now this one is broken. I can't fix this one either. So this is a classic example, what Zejing was talking about. Consumers are not taking responsibility for their products because their business model is, let's design products to fail so that customers will have to buy new ones. And this is where, another person had commented, I think it was Nino or Nina, sorry, I had commented from Australia about stewardship schemes. The government needs to step in and say, you know what, this is not right. If you want to sell a product, you should design for disassembly, make it easy for customers to fix, first of all. And number 2, you should sell parts at a reasonable market profit, not gouging the customers in this way. That to me would be an excellent first start. So, oh, I'm glad I got that off my chest. This has been bugging me for years. So anyway.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Usha, would you like to add something to this? Maybe I don't know.
Other than to say to Scott, yep, I think you've summarized it really well. It's a bugbear of mine as well, and it's particularly with things like phones. You can't do without them, and then every 2 years you need to get a new one because you can't find the charger for it. So I completely agree, and this extends the same thing with laptops. 2-3 years they last, and we've got to start putting, as consumers, putting pressure back on some of the companies as well. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And we have a question actually to Professor Yarime in the chat box by, who is this? Aini from Talk University. Aini, maybe you can repeat your question here so that if you're here and we can see you.
Yes, thanks so much, Nalita. So actually, my question is it's related to the presentation of Yarime Sensei. So actually, it's in the last point that Professor talked about like some kind of action we need to do to promote the circular economy for the battery. So one of these is about the data governance. So my concern is like, do we have any kinds of mechanism or good practice that already implemented to build up the public trust on the data governance? So this is like my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question, a very important question. Okay, with regard to the recycling of batteries, I think, as I mentioned, that now the industries in the world, some are trying to establish a kind of system where the different suppliers and different users can make transactions of used batteries, but then that the key is that to what extent that we can guarantee the data is very accurate and trustworthy, so that we can make a kind of robust transactions. So then who can create the system, or who can establish the system is a really big challenge. And that probably depends upon the local conditions, in the sense that, let's say, some of the countries, the government might play an important role in creating such a system, or in other countries, like a more independent entity, like a data trust, can be established. And this is actually proposed by countries like UK and also Canada. And these countries really, some are trying to establish what is called data trust, the independent entity to deal with the data. But then maybe some of the countries like China, the government probably would play a big role in facilitating that kind of system. So yeah, it's a very important question, and actually I'd be very keen to learn good practices anywhere in the world. So if you have any information, that please let me know. I'd be happy to explore these good practices.
Yeah, so actually, this is as I learned from like also literature and also the concern from the public in Vietnam is about like the data, personal information. When we think about like the data governance, it's either like governments or independently managed. So it's like, I'm so curious about this one as well. So it's one of the critical points if we try to promote the electric vehicle or automobile vehicles. Thank you so much, Professor. I think, yeah, I'm really happy that we can explore more about this.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very good question.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay, thank you very much. And we just had the keyword a little bit Vietnam, so what kind of leads me to the other question that Bin Ho asked about Vietnam. Bin Ho, are you there? Maybe you can just, because
yes,
I think it's also
yes.
a good question for everyone.
This
Scott
is Bin Ho
already
speaking.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I wrote my question on the chat box.
Yeah. So you're asking, so you're telling us Vietnam is starting its policy to implement and encourage circular economy.
Yep.
Is there any lesson on applying circular economy model in developing countries to share today? And Scott gave some links, provided some links, but maybe you would all like to comment here as well.
Natalie, I'm happy to take this one if you like.
Yes, please.
There are some great examples. I'll direct you to our One Planet Network website. And these are all examples largely in the buildings and construction sector. There's one in Africa of using recycled plastic bottles, filled with soil and used as infill for walls. There's another one in India where they have used the waste from the cement industry to create tiles and bricks to be used in buildings. So there are some examples, and I'll put that into the chat right now. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And because of time, if it's okay, I'm going to hop to the next question, but I would like to tell the audience, everyone, you're very free to contact our three speakers today by email. I'm sure they're very happy to continue chatting and talking with you later today on certain topics. So the last question is, I think by Simon, I'm not sure. Great talks. Thanks to all the speakers today. Any perspectives on rare metals and recycling of rare metals, particularly in the context of the ongoing geopolitical crisis? So also, I think a very good question, important question. Would anyone like to comment on this? Or did I choose a difficult question?
I just think, Natalie, it's a question that doesn't have any easy answers, because
Exactly.
it's as much a political issue as it is an economic and a social issue. I think, yeah, I mean, some of the impact of the mining of rare minerals, particularly in developing countries, leaves behind a really a footprint that is very difficult to resolve. And again, there are lots of economic incentives that goes into the hands of a few, which is not really shared across the community. So yeah, it's not. We could discuss this and debate it for hours on end, I reckon.
Right. I absolutely agree. Okay, well, then maybe because we're out of time, and I really hate to do this always, to be the bad one interrupting. I think it would be really just a good way to wrap it up by asking our three panelists for some final or concluding thoughts or remarks or reflections on today's discussions. If there is not one final really important question, because all questions are important though. And so yeah, so kind of entering the wrap up, and I would say I would start with Masaru. I'm going from the back because you must be getting really tired over there, without any sleep. So Masaru, please, maybe some quick thoughts or reflections on today's.
Yeah, thank you very much. I very appreciate this opportunity to discuss with all the students and also particularly early stage researchers. Yeah, I think the goal of achieving the carbon neutrality and also the circular economy is not easy, I think. So we really need to be careful what are the opportunities, but then what are the trade-offs, what are dilemmas, and how we can manage this transition would be a really big challenge in the coming years. So we really need to be careful what we should do based upon all the data, science, so that although we have an overall goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, for example, but then that it's not really easy going directly to that, but we might need to think about some shifting away from directly moving into that goal, but maybe we can also need to think about some resilience in the sense that we need to have kind of a certain degree of flexibility and also alternatives, so that in the end that we can achieve the objective of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050.
Wonderful, thank you. Usha, can I ask you for some final reflections?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. It's been really interesting from my end, sitting here on a cold, wintry day in Melbourne. My advice to the students would be: the future is in your hands, and you have every right to ask why or why not. And if things have been done in a particular way, you can take the license to question whether we are doing things the right way or have done things the right way, and what is a better way of doing things. So I would give you the full license, but also I think you should take this opportunity, this learning opportunity, to find better ways of doing things. So be optimistic, please. The glass is half full, not half empty. Thanks, Natalie.
Wonderful message. Thank you very much. And finally, Scott, please.
Oh, that's perfect, because I'm going to offer the counter to my dear friend Usha, which is be pessimistic. Let's leave on a dark note rather than a happy note. Look, folks, the reality is this: 7.6 billion people consuming at current levels is problem enough. We are going to have a planet with another 1.4 billion in about a decade and a half. And everybody wants to consume more. So we are going to see massive problems in the future. So let's put the circular economy into perspective. The circular economy will not solve our problems. We need to dematerialize our way of living. If we don't do that, we are condemning future generations to much hardship, I believe. But, you know, what do we do right now? Do we sit and moan and complain about it? No. And this goes back to Usha's comment, which I agree with. You know, you have to play a role in trying to solve the problem. And so that's what we're, really trying to do, each of us in our own way. You saw Prof. Yarime's work is, bridges the energy and circular economy and looks at efficiencies in that way. You see Prof. Yaraniga's work, and she's looking at, developing nation challenges. She's also looking at construction in the built environment and how do we do it better. I work on corporate strategy and policy. We all have roles to play. And, at the end of the day, we just sort of hope that while all of this is going on, we'll have some conversations around what makes us happy. What is happiness about? What should we try to be achieving? And hopefully over time that will start to change, the way that we approach life. But in the meantime, we're going to see increased prices. And this is going to go right back to Sammy's last question on rare metals. We're going to see higher prices. We're going to see scarcity. It's going to be more difficult to innovate because we won't have access to cheap metals. This is the predicament that we've put ourselves into. And so since we put ourselves into it, maybe we ought to be playing a role in getting ourselves out of it. So there you go. Dark cloud day.
Thank you, but very perfect final words and a wonderful wrap up, I think. Gives everybody a little bit to think about. Okay, so thank you once more to our wonderful speakers. It was really wonderful. So please, I would like to ask for a round of applause from everyone. So add a reaction button or turn on your cameras and show your faces and just clap your hands. So thank you very much again. And thank you also to our wonderful participants for your active and enthusiastic participation here with many comments and questions.